The death of several Americans in Mexico recently has reignited fears that Mexico isn't safe. The country's president said that Mexico is actually safer than the United States, and there's some data that backs that up. Because in every country you have safe cities and unsafe cities. And today we're going to share with you some of the safest cities for living in Mexico. And this data is put together both by actual quantitative analysis from statistics, as well as qualitative analysis from expats and nomad capitalists who've lived in different parts of Mexico. We put all this together for a list of the safest cities. If you want to view the entire list, you can go to nomadcapitalist.com. We'll put a link in the description with a longer article. But despite the recent issues, I do believe that you can live in Mexico and be very safe. Much like you wouldn't live in the bad part of town in your country, you wouldn't move to Mexico and live in the bad part of town. And so obviously when people come to us for help at Nomad Capitalist and we figure out where they're gonna move, whether it's one place all the year or maybe they live somewhere for 3 or 4 months and they have a couple of those, we're gonna say, hey, here's where you might wanna consider living and maybe here's some areas that you wanna avoid. Because if you got robbed in New York City, you probably wouldn't blame New York City, but some of you got robbed or something happened to you in Mexico, you say, oh, it's all Mexico's fault. This stuff can happen anywhere. But I wanted to share with you the safest cities that if you're just looking to have that statistical edge of being in the places where things are safe to begin with, and then you can do as you please, this is it. And so one of the safest cities that's often talked about is Merida in Yucatan. This is, I think, a relatively business-friendly city. Like you walk down the street, they've got Wi-Fi in the street. The capital is known for its colonial architecture, incredible food, close proximity to archaeological sites, and it's got one of the lowest crime rates in the country. There was an article that said it was the second safest city on the entire continent after Quebec City, Canada. Not a single US city made that top 50 cities list. So according to one report, Merida in Yucatan beat out pretty much everywhere in the United States, which backs up a lot of the crime data there. They have the occasional pickpocket, which you can find anywhere, but your biggest safety concern, according to one expat, is simply busy traffic, which I'm not entirely sure. If Merida's traffic is bothering you, you've got bigger problems in life. Another city that has had some issues recently, but I still know people who live there and they feel very safe, is Playa del Carmen. This is south of Cancun on the way to Tulum, which I would be avoiding Tulum these days for a number of reasons, unless you're into muscle relaxers, but I think Playa del Carmen probably a better bet. It's still growing, economy's expanding, cost of living is still very reasonable, and so you've got a lot of expats who have gone and lived there. Big digital nomad scene. When we had Nomad Capitalist live there in 2021, ran into a lot of folks who just happened to be living there, and they really did enjoy it. You have had some recent incidents of drug-related violence nearby in Tulum, and a little bit of that has spilled over to Playa del Carmen. But people who live there have said they still feel pretty good by and large, and you can live there very affordably on the water. My favorite city in Mexico, which I believe is very safe, and I think perhaps like New York got cleaned up, Mexico City also followed a path a few years later than New York. They actually had called Rudy Giuliani and said, hey, consult us on how to make our city safer. Now, you want to stay away from some of the more far north or far south neighborhoods in Mexico City, particularly after dark. And so there's certain areas, somebody mentioned Tepito or Merced, you don't want to go there. But if you're staying in Polanco, if you're staying in the area along Reforma, if you're staying in Roma Norte, if you're staying in Condesa, Lomas for sure, big beautiful houses, people have security guards, you can live very well. We interviewed the founder of Wall Street Bets, who lives in Mexico and feels safer than he would in the United States. He feels he's able to navigate the city better. Now you have pollution, you have actual traffic, unlike what you'd find in Merida, which are downsides. But if you're living in a neighborhood that is affluent, by the way, the benefit of those affluent neighborhoods, same as in some other parts, like in Istanbul, Turkey, is they're often built in the areas where the earthquakes have the least impact. That's part of what made them initially attractive to affluent people. And so if your concern is earthquakes, living in a place like Polanco perhaps reduces that risk. Mexico City, I think, has so many neighborhoods that you can stay very much safe, and there's a big police presence in many of them. Definitely has a very safe feeling. Puerto Vallarta, a lot of people like to live along the west coast in Jalisco, known as being family friendly, increasingly a destination for same-sex couples as well, and they have remained, according to expats, largely uninvolved in the cartel conflicts, relatively low cost of living, beautiful beaches, great infrastructure, great internet, better than many of the other beach communities on the West Coast. Another city that I was in not too long ago, Guadalajara, also in Jalisco, inland. Doesn't quite have the feeling of Mexico City from my perspective, but you've got some, for example, tip-top, great restaurants there. Great culture in one of the largest cities in Mexico. Things move a bit more slowly there. People are very warm, very welcoming. A lot of retirees lived at the south of Guadalajara, kind of on the other side of the airport, along Lake Chapala, in places like Ajijic. And so that could be interesting. You've got certain expat communities there, if that's what you're looking for. There are unsafe areas, of course, of Guadalajara, as you'd find in any large city in a country. So again, Los Angeles, Chicago, kind of the 2 and 3 cities in a country, you're going to have some bad areas. You're going to want to stay out of those areas. But a lot of expats really enjoy living in Guadalajara. It is, again, a little bit slower, different kind of vibe if you don't like the hustle and bustle of Mexico City, but you still want a big city. Guadalajara is interesting. And the statistics have actually shown that you are less likely to be the victim of violent crime in Guadalajara than you would be in Chicago or a number of other U.S. cities. Oaxaca, very interesting cuisine, Oaxaca. People mentioned Huatulco, the Oaxaca City, as safe places to go. It was within our lifetime that Chiapas, for example, was very problematic. Oaxaca, not so far from Chiapas, and people are saying that we feel very safe here. So we'll put more about that on nomadcapitalist.com. Not as popular as a place to live as the beach regions, but I really love the food there. If you want to live on the beach, Ensenada in Baja California, close enough that you can even get there from the U.S. very, very easily, hop around the car, go for a road trip. We're seeing that part of the country. Also mention La Paz in Baja California Sur as a great place to go. Very low cost of living, although lots of people are coming in, like Cabo, for example, is becoming a big, big place. But Baja California and all up and down that peninsula is becoming bigger. San Miguel de Allende in Guanajuato has long been a place for retirees, for digital nomads, an affordable place to go. People feel safe there. They just say, okay, keep an eye out at night. You can say that anywhere, quite frankly. People also mentioned Sayulita and Nayarit and other places. Even a city in Chiapas, San Cristobal de las Casas, made it on the list. So there's really places all over Mexico, primarily that are a little bit further south or at least central. There are certain areas of the coast that you wouldn't want to go to, for example, in Veracruz. But these are the cities. So if you have spent time in Mexico, if you've lived in Mexico, leave a comment below. If you're looking for a place to live in Mexico, you can go to nomadcapitalist.com and the article we're putting together on all these safest places. And I think it's important to look at, again, what do the statistics bear out? Not entirely always accurate, whether in your country or whether in another country, but also what's the experience of the locals? Because again, if you set yourself up in the right way, you can move overseas and have a safer life than you would in your own country. The difference is you're used to life in your own country, and so you may not take as many precautions, and you may just kind of have adjusted to how things work. When you go overseas, you're on high alert, and I think that that will give you the ability to create a very safe life for yourself. Mexico is a soft landing country for Americans and Canadians and others who like the idea of having some of the same aspects of culture, great weather, great food, nice people. You can get a Mexican residence permit without really making much of an investment. And so it's a place that people of all income levels and wealth levels can move to and work towards citizenship. This is what we help people do at Nomad Capitalist, is put the pieces together that if you want to move overseas, how do you handle your taxes? Mexico is not a tax haven, and yet there are ways where people can reduce their taxes living in Mexico. There are ways to get citizenship in Mexico. There are ways to give birth in Mexico and give your kids a second citizenship. There's many places to live there. How does Mexico fit into your plans? For some folks, it's a great backup plan just to keep in your back pocket. And knowing that it's safe gives you the ability to have a residence permit there with confidence that maybe you only go and visit once a year, but hey, if things get bad enough where I live, I've got a home in Mexico and I can go there and they're going to welcome me, not as a tourist, but as an actual resident that has a higher level of being welcomed. And maybe one day I can be a citizen and have a passport. That's what Nomad Capitalist helps people do, is put those pieces together, figure out what role each country, each bank, each institution has in their life, how to make it all work together legally. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. And it's really been exciting to see people moving to Mexico and realizing that it's not really what their country makes it out to be.